pros need to know. And this webinar is being brought to you as a partnership between Bentley University User Experience Center and the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative. So first, I just want to give a agenda of what we'll be talking about today. I'll give some brief introductions of folks you'll be hearing from. We'll talk about some definitions of terms, so we're all on the same page. And then we're here to learn about WCAG 3.0. So we'll talk a little bit about the background, structure, and then a little bit about testing. And then we'll devote a good portion of this at the end, probably by 12:45, if not before, to some question and answers that you can use the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar interface to submit your questions. So if as you're hearing us, if you have questions, please feel free to put a question in. And Jeanne Spellman will be with me, and I'll introduce her in a second. But Jeanne or I will answer the questions as they come in as best we can. Obviously, we won't be able to get to them all, but we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. So first, some introductions. Who you'll be hearing today. So myself, Peter McNally. I work at the User Experience Center at Bentley University. And we're very honored today to have with us Jeanne Spellman, the co-lead of the Silver Task Force. And I'll tell you a little bit what Silver is. So Jeanne and I will be presenting today, and I'll be actually asking Jeanne a few questions about WCAG 3.0 or WCAG 3.0 as we go along. Other folks I want to introduce you to, Bill Albert is the Executive Director of the User Experience Center, and he'll be saying a few words about the UXC and at the end, an upcoming webinar that we'll be hosting next month. And then Shannon, who maybe some of you know from communication, she won't be speaking, but she's here in the background, making sure everything is running smoothly. And then last but not least, I want to introduce Carrie O'Brien. She's going to be captioning the webinar today. She's from Purple Communications. And I'll just mention how the captioning works in Zoom. So in the Zoom webinar, so they're streaming in Zoom. So these can be viewed in Zoom under show transcript of show subtitles. And Shannon, I don't know if you can like send it out to everyone if anyone needs the access to captioning in Zoom. All right. So I'm going to next hand it over to Bill Albert, who's going to give a brief introduction of the UXC.
All right, thanks, Pete. I won't take more than 45 seconds, hopefully. So my name is Bill Albert. I'm the Executive Director of the User Experience Center at Bentley University. And just a quick plug about us and what we do. So we are a global UX consulting group. We work with clients all over the world on a whole range of UX research projects, running from user research around surveys and benchmarking, persona work, into the design and evaluation phase around usability testing, and specifically usability testing for accessibility, and also design and innovation work. And if you're at all interested in any professional services around accessibility testing or any of the other UX research services that we offer, would be super interested in talking to you and potentially having a partnership with the organization. So Shannon's going to send out an email if you're interested, reply back or find us on the web. Okay. Thanks, and back to you, Pete.
All right, thanks, Bill. All right, so before we get too far, I just want to level set with some definitions. I know people are coming from different areas. Some people are coming from, pure UX. Some people are probably more accessibility pros. So this will be old hat, but just so we're on the same page. So first off, just a basic definition. What is accessibility? So at a basic level, it's giving people with disabilities the ability to use technology. So in the US, here's some stats. Now I got these stats from the CDC. So what I'm referencing here on the slide to the left, this is a screenshot of a CDC infographic that I think is pretty good. It's also looks pretty accessible too. But according to the CDC, there's approximately 61 million people in the US have a disability, which maps to about 26%. And then globally, about 1 billion people have a disability. And one little side note that if you're new to accessibility, if you're interested to follow it on social media, so the hashtag folks use for accessibility, it's A11Y, and why they use that is if you count the letters between the A and Y in accessibility, there's actually 11 characters. So a little trivia there for you in social media land. So some more stats from the CDC. So just, I want to just bring home the fact that, accessibility is very important because lots of people benefit from accessible products. So for example, this is percentage of US adults with different functional disability types. So you can see here, mobility is the most with 13.7, cognition 10.8, people who have challenges with independent living is at 6.8, hearing 5.9, vision 4.6, and self-care 3.7. Now, you may have seen different stats, and some of these, these are probably not mutually exclusive, but I think it's, nonetheless, there's the main theme here is that impact a lot of people and more than you probably realize. So I want to talk next about the intersection of accessibility and UX. So, so when we think about user experience, we think about, the big picture, really about giving people the ability to use products and services. And, really it should be about giving everyone or giving all the ability to use products and services, regardless of ability. And accessibility should be a baseline of a good experience, a good user experience. So I would say that without access, products and services are not usable. So that's really the first step is really is your product accessible? And then the counterpoint there is that accessibility by itself does not mean that you're going to have a good user experience. Now, obviously, it's a requirement. But there's lots of things that go into a good user experience. So as you can see here, so this is this honeycomb diagram from Peter Morville and Andrew Litty. They have different characteristics of useful, usable, findable, credible, desirable, valuable, and accessible. So all those really need to come together for a good experience. So you could have like a really accessible, product. You've done all your due diligence around WCAG, WCAG, but if it doesn't meet the user's needs, maybe it's not really useful. Then it's probably not that good. But just something to think about when we think about the intersection of accessibility and UX. All right, so now I'm going to jump to give a little bit of background on WCAG 3.0. So where did we come from? So how this is going to work? I'm going to start off doing some talking here, and then we have Jeanne with us from the W3C, and I'm going to, as I go through some of these slides, I have some questions that I'm going to pose to Jeanne to learn more. And she's been working on WCAG 3.0, her and her team for several years, and she really is the expert. So I'm really looking to her to give us some insights into that, and then we'll go from there. So let me just start off by saying, what is WCAG 3.0? So it's a draft of new accessibility guidelines from the W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium. You may hear people pronounce it as WCAG. That's how a lot of people say it, or maybe say it a little bit differently than that, but that's how I typically say it. So So this is a 3.0 version. So what does that mean? That means that in the past, there was previous versions. So going way back to prehistoric days as far as the web is concerned, back in 1999, we started off with WCAG 1.0, and that was, back then, if you remember, that HTML was very basic, so those guidelines were kind of at a very basic level. And then over the years, as web technology advanced, so did the guidelines. In 2008, we had 2.0, 2018, 2.1, and then we're currently at, or coming to soon, 2.2. So the one thing I'll note is that the acronym has stayed the same, but actually it's changed what it actually stands for. So in the past, it stood for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but going forward, it now stands for W3C Accessibility Guidelines. So just a slightly different focus there. We're getting away from HTML and kind of looking at more broader products. So if you've been following this, you may know that this effort is referred to by many as Silver. So you might be wondering, where did they get that name Silver from? So if you think about the acronym Accessibility Guidelines, or AG, AG is the chemical element symbol for silver. So hence, that's where they got the name Silver from. So I think it's kind of, it's a nice little trivia there. When you do your pub trivia, you can maybe score some points around that. So one point I want to make is that WCAG 3.0 will not replace any of the 2 versions, or 2.2 or whatever comes after that, until 3.0 is final. So which will be several years. They're going to coexist for several years to come until the 3.0 version is final. The 2 versions will still be out there and being used and being worked with. So the first draft was published in January. So this was the first draft of the guidelines. And the URL here, if you want to get more information, and you can go there. One thing I'll point out that I have 2 URLs here. The first one on the top, the w3.org/tr/WCAG -3.0. That's kind of the official page that has all the information. But then I like the introduction below. That URL has a nice summary and some kind of well-written summaries of different aspects. So that's a good place to go also. So one thing, as I was kind of preparing for this webinar, one thing that I was really impressed with, thinking about it from a UX standpoint, I was really impressed with how the Silver team did this work coming up with this first draft, and that they really seem to put user research, from the get-go, from the beginning of the project, way back in 2016, when they started. And they started out, they identified stakeholders, and they created a list of research questions. They evaluated the 2.0 or 2.1 version of WCAG and got feedback from users. That would be accessibility testers, UX professionals, to see what they thought. And some of the things they learned that it needs to be easier to understand, especially for beginners. The success criteria need to be easier to interpret and remove the ambiguity from those. And then the grading system needs to be more nuanced, right? In the two world, it was very much a binary pass-fail grading system. So we'll see as we look at how that's going in 3.0, they're moving away from that. And then they invited 27 leaders across the industry to work on solutions for a 2-day design sprint. And then from that, they used those suggestions to draft the requirements. And then from 2018 to 2020, they've worked on ideas and prototype. So at this point, I want to bring Jeanne into the conversation. So Jeanne, maybe you can share with us what were some of the biggest surprises from the research that you saw?
Well, first, I want to start out with thanking Pete McNally and the Bentley University UX community, because Pete did one of the early research projects on it's a study of WCAG use by UX professionals. And that was the first study that was done, and it guided a lot of our early decision-making and directions. So you all had a very big influence on the draft where it is today, and I thank you for that. Basically, it showed people generally liked the guidance of WCAG 2, but it was difficult to use, ambiguous, and very hard for beginners to learn. But the biggest surprise that came out of the research was the structural inequality between disabilities and the support of different disabilities in WCAG 2. For example, if you're blind, your user needs are mostly addressed at the WCAG A level, which is the most important level. And on the other hand, if you have a cognitive disability, many of your needs aren't addressed, or they're addressed at the AAA level, which is considered optional to regulators and therefore is rarely implemented. So one of the first things we had to do was to start addressing that problem. The other aspect of it that was, again, surprising is that it was very difficult to bring in the needs of other disabilities, particularly intersectional disabilities. So there's very little in WCAG 2 for blind, deaf, deaf blind, deaf with cognitive disabilities, aren't really addressed at all. And then speech-related disabilities that are becoming very important now that we have smart speakers are becoming ubiquitous. Those aren't addressed at all. And it's very difficult to include them because there have been various groups trying to add them to the WCAG 2 line of 2.1 or 2.2. So we knew that we had to make a very big change to how we structured it and scored it.
Okay, thank you, Jeanne. Right. Okay, so from this research, they came up with some goals for the effort of WCAG 3.0. Basically, they want to do a few things. So make the guidelines easier to use, so easier for beginners, and I think everyone in the UX community can understand that. And if anyone, as a UX professional, if you're not in accessibility full time, I think one of the things we saw in the research was that it can be the 2.0 version of the guidelines were a little overwhelming, to say the least. If you're not doing it every day and you have to, your boss says you need to do a accessibility review. Here's go to this website, look at the WCAG guidelines. Where do I begin? So I think that's definitely an important goal coming out of this research. And as Jeanne said, making it more inclusive for other disability types, low vision, cognitive disabilities, as Jeanne discussed, and then more platforms. So as I mentioned, back in the day when they did the 1.0 version, it was basically basic HTML and maybe JavaScript, but that was about it. And now with mobile and things like voice, input, Alexa, voice response, and XR, augmented and virtual reality, the complexities have really grown. So it's not just HTML elements anymore. We really have to look at the advanced technology. And then related to that, as we advance, technology is not going to stand still. So things are going to change. We need to make sure that these guidelines can be maintained over time as technology changes. So now we're going to talk about the structure that's proposed in the first draft of the WCAG 3.0 guidelines. So as Jeanne mentioned, that the structure has changed going forward. So there's three main elements. So there's guidelines. So these are high-level plain language version of the content. And these are written for managers, policymakers, individuals who are new to accessibility. We say we want to make it easy for beginners, including how-to sections to describe guidance. And then guidelines can have one or more outcomes, which are testable criteria that include information on how to score the outcome. And then from the outcome, we have methods, which are detailed information on how to meet these outcomes. So I'll talk a little more about this here. I was really impressed with this So they have code samples, working examples, and user stories. I think they've done a really good job focusing on user perspective as opposed to just the technology. So kind of putting everything into user stories, which was great, and then other resources. So Jeanne, another question for you. What do you think are the main advantages of this new structure over the old structure of the WCAG 2?
Well, I'm hoping that it's I'm hoping it's going to be easier for beginners. We put a lot of effort into developing more basic guidance. And then we also started developing guidance by the activity of the group working on whatever the website or the product is. So we have a page of information for every guideline. We have a page of information for project planners, for designers, for developers, so that, again, we're hoping to start bringing in more people into the accessibility process than just saying, oh, this is a developer problem. Then we are hoping, and we're testing this. This is not, we have a whole test plan for this, but we're trying to bring in more of the disability types. This was very, very hard to do. And it took us a long time before we finally got a process that everyone could agree on. But we think the outcomes and the way we've broken up the outcomes with critical errors and the scoring system is going to make it a level playing field for different disability types. So we can also include rating scale tests instead of just binary true-false tests. And then the point system gives us a more nuanced view of the real accessibility of the site or the product, because WCAG 2, you either pass 100% or you fail. And we want to, first of all, give people the chance to pass if they're very good, even if they're not 100%. And then we also want to be able to say, this is where you are. It's not just that you fail, but you fail at a score of 62 out of 100, or you're at 86 out of 100. So people can have a more nuanced view of where they are.
Right. And
And then the other thing was that large and dynamic websites could not technically claim conformance to WCAG 2 at all, because it was so page oriented and wasn't really supportive of dynamic text. We were cutting out some of the biggest websites on the web, and particularly the big social media sites that update tens of thousands of times a second. They can't do that kind of testing that WCAG 2 required. So we think we're on the right approach, and we're very much looking for feedback about it.
Great. Thank you, Jeanne. That sounds great. So I want to go over some of the guidelines now. So as we said, this is a first draft of WCAG 3.0. And so the first draft, they've included only 5 guidelines, because I think, and Jeanne, you can talk about this when we get to the question, but my assumption is, they want to almost, I'm assuming, kind of prototype it and see how it goes with some strategic guidelines. So what they're looking here is text alternatives. So if anyone has done any work in accessibility, you're probably familiar with alt text. It's probably the first thing that you learn about when you study accessibility for visually impaired people, making sure you have text or graphics. Clear words. Now, I really I like seeing this one here, because, as Jeanne mentioned, that, one of the groups that was not included earlier was folks with cognitive disabilities. And when you get into language and clear words, that can have a lot of impact on folks, really impact on everyone. Plain language is important for all users. This was guidelines that were not included in earlier versions. Captions, and what you can see from Carrie's work, that's very important for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, or really, again, for anyone depending on the situational environment. And then headings. So basically, folks who are using screen readers rely on headings for navigation to understand the structure. of their web page or screen. So that's very important. And then visual contrast of text, something I see every project is always color contrast issues. You know, just poor contrast, gray text on a white background, for example. So Jeanne, another question for you. So I'm curious, I know just guessing here why you picked these 5, but tell us the inside information. Why were these 5 selected for the first draft, and were there others that maybe were strong contenders that didn't make it?
Okay, well, they first started with a research project that Sarah Horton and Dave Sloan did on the ease of learning, remembering, and teaching WCAG 2 success criteria. So they ranked them as easy, medium, and hard in each of those categories. So we originally picked an easy, a medium, and a hard to start prototyping with them. And then after the initial prototyping, we picked the guidelines by what we wanted to illustrate, because as we started to work out the various problems, the devil is always in the details. So text alternatives is our very basic one, as Pete said. That's moved over with very minimal changes except for the scoring. Clear words is our new one, and we needed to prove that we could include the guidance that had been rejected by the WCAG 2 group because it couldn't meet the structure. I mean, it's not like they were prejudiced against it, but the way WCAG 2 is set up with very strict rules of what can be a success criteria, it was really a problem. So it was very important early on to prove we could get new guidance in. Captions was a little disappointing. That one is to illustrate the emerging technologies for virtual reality. And we have a lot of work done on it that's very oriented toward virtual reality, but it didn't make the first cut. So you'll see it in the next draft. Structured headings, again, was one of the easies that came out of Dave and Sarah's research. But that one in particular illustrates how we can include AAA content in without penalizing people that don't have it. So what we're trying to do is include the AAAs and give people more points for them so that they're not, there's an incentive for people to start implementing the AAAs, but if they don't do it, they don't fail. And then the last one is the visual contrast of text. And this one I think is the most exciting and probably interesting to some of this audience. This is an example where we're taking an existing WCAG 2 guideline, actually 2 of them, and merging them, the color contrast guidelines, but we're changing the algorithm so that it is closer to the current state-of-the-art research on visual readability and light and color. And I think it's very exciting because I think it's opening up the color palette for designers and giving you a lot more colors that you can use that will pass, particularly for those poor, unfortunate companies that had orange in their color palette, and virtually nothing in the WCAG 2 algorithm would pass if it had orange in it. So that was very difficult for a lot of companies, and this now addresses that problem. So we're very interested in getting more feedback from other researchers and to get the comments from designers as well.
Right.
Oh, and the other strong contenders were, let's see, audio description, pause, stop, hide, and language of environment, which we use to build up rough sections that never actually made it in. So those will be done and developed in a future draft.
Great. All right. Thanks, Jeanne.
Oh, and one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. We have a group working on error messages for the next draft. So if any of you are interested and would like to participate, we would love your input.
No, that's great. Error handling is one of those things that, impacts everyone, but I think it's always forgotten until the end, right?
Yes.
You can think about it up front. Very good. Okay. All right. So I want to just, delve a little deeper into one of these. And again, I said, I like the clear words because I think from a UX standpoint, there's a lot of overlap there because, good writing, UX writing is becoming a thing now. And just, I think as UX folk, we've all seen examples of bad labels, bad text on web pages, and I think it's, for everyone, this is something that should be, it's a critical issue. So for clear words, so as we said, just going to go over an example here of how these guidelines are structured for this one. So the guideline here is use common, clear words. So again, they want to make it, very simple, very basic, understandable for all, regardless of, what your role is, whether it's a project manager or a business person. Then the outcome, again, it seems pretty straightforward, using common and clear words in all contexts. So again, I'm sure the devil is in the details there, but I think as far as the outcome goes, I think that's, pretty clear to me. And then I want to talk about the methods, because I think this is what I was talking about earlier a little bit when I was talking about user stories. So, this method, this is on the website. You can see the URL there. So this is broken into different sections. Introduction. You can see there it talks about a summary. Clear words help create more accessible content for people with cognitive and learning disabilities. Use words or phrases that are most frequently used for the current context, unless it will result in a loss of meaning or clarity. And then another section they have are examples. So here they've added user stories, which I thought was really good. So this is one example. So as a user with a language impairment, learning disability, and or a memory impairment, I want the language used to be clear and easy for me to understand, so that I can understand the content. So again, if you think about agile development, user stories are part of that, and I think it's important when you're doing your user stories to think about users with disabilities. And they've also, if you go to this URL, you can see they have some related personas, which I think could be helpful in, when you're doing your persona work. I'm sure that they would love you took these and added them to your personas for your product. Caroline, a yoga teacher who has ADHD, and George, a user who works in a supermarket and has Down syndrome. So I think that's one thing when we talk about persona work, make sure that they're inclusive, and we do include people with disabilities in our persona work. All right, so now I'm going to hand it over to Jeanne, and Jeanne is going to walk us through the testing approach for WCAG 3. So Jeanne, I'll just advance the slides when you're ready. So
Great. So this took us 2 years to get this. So and it's still, unfortunately, it's still rather sketchy. We're working on the details, and we've been getting a lot of very good feedback, very useful feedback from people commenting on the draft. So for our testing approach, we're writing the outcomes as testable criteria. We tried to get away from that level and found that we really couldn't. There's a certain point where you have to say, does it do X? And where we've started is the outcomes are based on user needs. So instead of writing the guidelines the way it was done in the past, where we start with the guideline and then write the success criteria and then write the techniques and then write the methods, we reverse the process. So we're starting with user needs and then saying, what are the outcomes that would have to happen to support that user need? And then we can write the tests, and then we work through the technical details, and then finally we write the guideline as the very last step. So we're starting with user needs and then doing the testing early. The testing in WCAG 2, the testing is by page, but in WCAG 3, we're looking at testing as scoped either by the site or by the product, like a mobile app would be an example of a product that would be covered under WCAG 3. So a view is the equivalent of a page or a screen, and then the process is the steps needed to complete a task. And this can go over many views. So we're trying to move more toward what is the user trying to accomplish and measuring that, rather than how much alt text is there, for example. We still have that, but we are moving more toward a task orientation. So we have the atomic tests, which are the tests that we do today. So pretty much the accessibility tests you do today will continue to be the accessibility tests you do after WCAG 3 is finished. The scoring will change, but the tests are going to be very similar. But then we also want to add the layer of user experience testing. And we're having a very hard time naming these types of tests. So people would have good ideas of how to name them, they would be welcome. So finally, you're going to go through, you're going to test your product, you're going to score the individual tests, and then you start looking at an overall score. And the overall score has two levels or two parts to it. And again, this is how we're trying to solve that equality problem between different types of disabilities. So you need an overall score to reach bronze level, and that's the minimum requirement is bronze. And then you will also need to have a score in each disability functional category. And we have a separate group that are working on a standardized functional category to support WCAG 3, but also other W3C specifications as well. So in order to meet bronze, you need to have no critical errors, and I'll talk more about critical errors in a minute, and then it meets the score. We're going to, one of the things we found in the research as well, going back a little bit, is that people don't understand A, AA, AAA. Most people, when you say, oh, my site meets level A, they think that's the best. And internationally, it doesn't scale well because there are plenty of languages that don't even have the letter A. But everyone understands bronze, silver, gold from the Olympics. So if you say we meet bronze level, everyone knows you're good, but you could be better. And that's what we want to give, is to give more motivation for organizations that really want to commit to accessibility, give them a reason to do it. So we're still working on the silver and the gold levels. What I hope is that the silver level will be oriented toward inclusive design and usability testing, and the gold level will be more oriented toward organizational maturity models. But we do not have agreement on that, and we're certainly looking for people that want to help us get there. We particularly need more help working on the inclusive design and user experience level.
Okay.
Next slide. And I'll try to go faster, sorry. Okay, so the critical errors are any accessibility problem that stops the user from being able to complete a process. And right now we have 3. These are items that stop a user if they exist at all, anywhere in the view, like flashing, like keyboard traps, audio that you can't pause. Then the second one is a new one. These are the errors that when they're located within the process means the process can't be completed. So an example would be an icon in the navigation that doesn't have alt text. What we want to do is be able to give organizations the ability to have small errors without failing. But we have to make sure that any errors that really are important do fail. And that's why we've gone to the critical error approach. So, and you'll see in different guidelines, there's a variety of scaling so that things that are more important are more likely to have a critical error. Things that are lesser importance we're giving more of an option to have more errors in there so that it's not blocking people from being able to say, yes, we meet this guideline. And then the third one is a very challenging one, and we're still working out the details on it. But these are errors that when they're aggregated across a view or across a process cause a failure. And this is really where it has a lot of impact on people with cognitive disabilities or pain disabilities, fatigue disabilities. They're not covered by the current WCAG guidelines because it's so individually oriented toward a pass-fail. So people that have disability needs that are involved in overall fatigue aren't handled. So this is an area that we're still working on, and but I think is very exciting and essential. Next slide, Pete. The point system has 3 levels. So first you test the views and the processes. These are the atomic tests, the tests you do today. And then you use that to assign an outcome score. And this is how we're averaging it. We're bringing different types of testing together so that they can be compared and averaged in a mathematically valid and fair way. And then you calculate the overall score, as I said, by the site or the product, and then by the disability category. And then finally you decide whether or not it meets bronze level. Go ahead, Pete. So the benefits. Sites can have a small percentage of accessibility bugs as long as they're not a critical error for people with disabilities. This makes it possible for large websites to pass, because we know, no one gets 100% in WCAG. And as one of the people mentioned in one of the questions we'll address later, this becomes a real problem for people who have legal issues. So having a few small problems on a really good site, we want that to pass. So another advantage is the tests can vary by guideline and method, so the most appropriate test can be used. Right now in WCAG 2, all you have is binary true-false statements. And that's not, it doesn't begin to cover the variety of disability needs that people have. Then we can include more needs of people with disability that were previously too hard to measure. And then for people who are testing just for conformance, if you encounter a critical error, you can stop testing that guideline because it fails. So some testers are reporting that it speeds up the conformance testing process. Now, obviously, if you're testing to find all of the bugs, that's not going to help you. But for people that do test, just does this pass, it's going to speed up your process. We're finding so far, again, the devil's in the details, but that's our direction. Next.
All right, so good segue here. So I know I've been seeing a lot of questions come in the QA form. So let's just give Jeanne and I a second to take a look at these. Jeanne, can you see the Q&A also?
I can, and
Okay.
actually I was just picking that I would answer a question from Matt. Because he's asking, will the new grading system help to make WCAG standards more understandable for those with no accessibility knowledge? It seems the current pass-fail system in place now has been weaponized by lawyers and creates a lot of resentment and frustration. So as I think I said, we are trying to make it, we're trying to address that weaponization. At least that's one of my personal goals. I mean, there are a variety of people who work on this standard coming from many different aspects of the accessibility community. So, but that's certainly one of the things that I've seen it weaponized, and I would like to see that end. I don't think the grading system is going to make it easier for beginners to understand, because right now this grading system is more complicated. But what I hope is that as we develop it more and we get into future drafts, then the accessibility tool companies are going to start stepping in, and many of them are involved in the work already, but they will start building tools that will make it easier to understand and will bypass all of the complexities of the grading system and just say, here's your score. But right now, it's definitely more confusing.
All right. I'll take the next one, Jeanne. Let me know if you agree with my answer here. So this is from Abdullah Al-Khalifi. I'm saying, hopefully I'm not mispronouncing that. Hi, our company is currently implementing accessibility technologies for our website and app. Should we consider waiting until WCAG 3.0 comes out, or can we proceed with the current standard? So I would say they shouldn't wait, even though 2.x is not perfect. It's, don't wait until 3.0 comes out. There's a lot of good information out there that you can, people have written blogs that you can to supplement what's on the official WCAG website. So I would say do the best you can with what's out there now, and then you'll be more ready for 3.0.
And we will provide a migration information for people who are currently at anywhere on the 2 spectrum that want to move to 3 once it's finished. But absolutely do not wait, particularly in the US, your risk of legal action is quite high these days. So you certainly do not want to wait to implement accessibility. Go with 2.0. And, I'm saying a lot of criticism of 2.0 because I'm trying to explain why we're making the changes we're making. But 2.0 is a very good standard. It has worked very well for 12 years. It has put accessibility on the map around the world. So I want to be a little more cautious about it. Does have its flaws because that's what it's a major upgrade. We're trying to identify and fix the flaws, but it's still very good. And you certainly should use it today.
Okay. So one more question. This is from C189198. Jeanne, I guess I'll put this to you. What are you doing for folks who are dyslexic? I've done tons of user research here.
So we haven't focused a lot on that, and we would love to have a conversation about the research and recommendations and where we can go. It's definitely in our next steps of, maybe not for the next draft, which right now we're trying to get out for May, but probably the draft after that would be one where we could start really digging in and putting in a lot of new guidelines for specific disabilities. So I'm pretty sure my contact information is on the last slide. So please definitely drop me a note and let's talk about the research and where we could see it fitting in.
Great. And then one more, I can take this. So Kirk asks, can you suggest any resources that exist for recruiting people with disabilities for testing our site and apps, remote or in person? I definitely can, Kirk. I've done a lot of usability testing with people with disabilities. There's definitely recruiters out there who are better than others, and there's organizations you can talk to, blind organizations and other groups. So if you want to send me a note, I can follow up with you offline. Let's see here. Jeanne, you want to pick the next one?
Sure. There's a question from Robert Henley. Why were no criteria from the WCAG 2 operable guideline included in the first draft, such as 211 keyboard? And that one, I will say, is more accidental. It wasn't deliberate. We are trying to pick the guidelines that illustrate some of the structural changes that were important. And that was primarily around scoring and the way different disabilities had an impact on the scoring. So we tended to pick guidelines that were multi-user disability oriented. For example, one of the things we found with headings is that headings could have had a approach that included people with cognitive disabilities, as well as the semantic aspect of supporting people who are blind. So that's why we picked that one. So we were trying to illustrate specific things. So it wasn't that we were ignoring operable for any deliberate thing. And we probably will have, now that you've mentioned it, I think I will look at that and make sure that we have an operable guideline in a future, one of the future drafts coming up.
Okay, I'll take the next one here. Let's see. I just had it and I lost it. 1 second here. Eugene, why don't you take the next one? I lost one that I wanted to do and I can't find it.
Okay, here's a hard one. Jason Cortez asks, can you speak to automated accessibility testing and how it will be impacted by the new scoring method and criteria? And this one is definitely, this is a tough one, because we've been trying different ways of approaching it. And one of the things we looked at is whether or not we could have a level, because a lot of people would like to have a level where the automated accessibility testing would let you pass. And the problem with it is that accessibility testing automation is such a rapidly moving target. And particularly as more artificial intelligence accessibility testing tools are coming on the market. I was looking at some new tools that were being developed by IBM for cognitive accessibility, testing cognitive accessibility issues. So the automation is moving very, very quickly. So we found that we could not write a separate automation level because we'd have to change it too often. And changing the base of accessibility standards, what we call the normative, the absolute required part that governments rely on, you can't change that very often. You know, there has to be a lot of thought put into any of those changes made. So we had to work around that in order to do the scoring system. We are in contact regularly with different automation tooling companies. Many of them participate. A lot of them are interested and are keeping an eye on the work. And I've spoken to a number of their organizations to talk to them about what's coming, what are the directions, what we'd like from them, when we want them to start working on putting the grading and the point system into their own tools. And so we expect to see that soon. Google, we did a prototype of the new color contrast algorithm. The researcher who worked with us closely on developing it made a testing tool. And it's obviously done by a single researcher. But then the Google Chrome team came along and they started building a WCAG 3 color contrast testing tool. And that was in, at least in the end of January, that was in one of their development builds. And they're also working on that automation. So I think we're going to start seeing more automation as the draft starts solidifying. This was our first draft and we needed to get it out and get feedback on it before we could really dig into more of the details. We needed to find out whether or not people actually like this approach. And fortunately, most people do. I mean, a lot of people have comments on the details of it, but the approach generally has had very good feedback.
So Jeanne, why don't we each take one more, and we're getting close to the top of the hour. So I'm going to take one from Al Avery. Aside from the potential legal ramifications of not having a focus on accessibility when building a website or web app, what are some business reasons we can use to promote accessibility to our stakeholders? This is a great question. So I think, you know, a lot of people do focus on the legal ramifications. They don't want to get sued. What's the least we can do so we don't get a lawsuit? At least that's better than ignoring accessibility. Obviously, it's not the best approach. I think what you need to do is really think about, you know, the business case, and it's really looking at, you know, just demographics, like we talked about in the first few slides about the number of folks with disabilities. And it's a huge population that if a company isn't accessible or usable, they're missing out on that revenue. And the other thing I would say too is look at the demographics. A lot of, you know, the aging population. As we age, you know, we unfortunately, you know, things go, right? So it's just going to get more and more. It's just good business. It's good. It's a good UX for folks, and it's a way to make more money for these companies. That's how I would say that. All right, Jeanne, why don't we do one more, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, I'm going to take, there's a number of questions asking about VPATs, and then also if we have regulators involved in the group. And so first, we actually do have a number of regulators who are active in participating in the group from around the world, actually. We have members of the Access Board for the US. We have members that are part of one of the EU boards, and we have a very active member who's active in Japan. So we are definitely keeping that in mind. Now, we do expect that VPATs will continue, that VPATs are probably going to evolve to match what we're doing. And we expect that to ramp up more once we work out more of the details in the point scoring system. ITI filed some very helpful and thoughtful comments on the process, so I know that they are watching and will be involved more in the future.
Okay, thank you, Jeanne. All right, so let me, we'll just kind of wrap up with some last slides here. So, hopefully you've enjoyed what you heard today. And, if you want to get involved with Jeanne and her team, they definitely would love to have you. So there's a few different ways that you can help. So you can join the Silver Community Group, and the URL is there. And they have groups forming on to work on new guidelines for the next draft. And then maybe that's too much of a commitment, but you're welcome to comment on future versions of WCAG 3.0 as they come out. And you can see the status at the URL there on the slide. And I'm sure you'll see it over social media as they get close to future drafts. So I want to end just by I want to thank everyone for attending our webinar. And I just want to let you know about a webinar coming up next month. I'm going to have Bill Albert say a few words about this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Great to have you all here. It was an amazing presentation with so much great content. We do run several webinars a year. We have one coming up on May 7th that I'll be presenting, called Where is Your UX Compass Pointing? And it's a case study where we look at how we measure overall product sentiment from the lens of not just usability, but also the emotional experience, design, and brand. And it's an extension of the experience scorecard work that we sort of rolled out in the fall. So we hope you all can attend, and Shannon's going to send out some information about that. A free event, May 7th, and hope to see you all there.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, so just want to again say thank you. If you have any questions on UX accessibility, please get in touch. You can see our email, website, and social media there. And if you need Jeanne's information, sorry, Jeanne, we didn't put it on there, but we can get that for folks too if they want to get in touch, or any of the URLs that we had on WCAG will get you in touch with Jeanne. So thank you very much for attending, and best of luck as you move forward in accessibility and user experience.